Thank you for putting the camera on. It is helpful to see those smiling faces out there. We are at the top of the hour, so I would like to introduce Kevin Taylor, who'll be doing our presentation today, which clearly was as exciting to many of you as it was to Karen and I. Today's presentation is creating safe and nurturing environments through SEL, or social and emotional learning. And I will turn it over to Kevin to introduce himself. Thank you again, Kevin.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you here on this sunny Friday morning. I first want to shout out to the Center for Schools and Communities for this opportunity to engage with you over the next few minutes and to present some of the body of work that I've had the opportunity and pleasure of leading and implementing in schools. And so, again, it is my pleasure to be here. And I want to start with our agenda for today. Of course, I'm gonna really want to welcome everyone into the space again. We'll do an inclusive activity and then jump into the content for safe and nurturing environments. And then I'm going to talk at the very end about, again, just sort of almost like a reflection of the work that I've done over the years as an educator in schools. And if we could hold off on any questions, we'll have an opportunity for a deeper conversation at the end. Objectives of understanding the importance of creating safe and nurturing environments, exploring equity-centered practices that are trauma-informed and evidence-based, and gain practical strategies to implement in school settings and youth programs. So I really want to stress again the body of work. This is almost like a self-reflection that I'm sharing with you, of teaching students in the margins, providing culturally sensitive education. And this presentation highlights my experience to support mostly Black and African American youth. That has been the predominant population that I've served. Who are identified for special education and assigned disciplinary removal at an alarming rate. So first, let me go into a little bit more about myself. Again, I am an educator. I started out in this career as a substitute teacher. I graduated with my bachelor's from the University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, a small historically Black college on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and had plans of going into design and art, but that quickly changed just because of some of the engagement and some of the experiences that I had in college. And so I had a mentor at that time, and he just recommended, he said, while you're in limbo, while you're trying to figure it out, why don't you substitute teach? And from there, here I am, 20 plus years in education, as a substitute teacher, a paraeducator, special education teacher, assistant principal, and now a district leader for the city of Baltimore. And so on the left, you'll see my beautiful family, my wife and our 3 kids. Someone gave us some advice and said, hey, why don't you just knock it all out and have all your kids all at once? And so yes, we have 3 teenagers living with us. So if there's anyone that has any word of advice or encouragement, I am open and receptive. We also have a 4th child. He has a furry face, and he's one of the cute ones in the bunch, but he runs the house, and his name is Ollie. We love him dearly. And there you just see some of the photos of some of my past experiences with students. Particularly one that I'm proud of, really proud of, that I'm going to be speaking later on in this presentation. So this quote, for these are all our children, we all profit by or pay for what they become, has been a grounding statement for me in the work that I do. It really speaks of equity and justice, and it prioritizes the need of really focusing on our most vulnerable population, our most valued population, which are our children. And so there's a Maasai tribe greeting from Kenya that says, and how are all of the children? And again, that is a prioritization and acknowledgement of the importance of the well-being of children and placing them at the center, for they should be the most protected. And so today, again, this is something that has kept my focus. I love being an educator. I loved being a teacher. And I really could not picture, although I had plans on doing something else with my life, I really could not imagine doing anything else. So I want to do an inclusive activity. This is the Courageous Conversation Compass. And the purpose of the compass is really a personal navigation tool to guide individuals through conversations. We're all coming in from a different place. So as we're talking about safe, nurturing environments today, where are you? Are you in the thinking space? Are you in the acting space? Are you in the emotional, you're feeling quadrant? Or are you in the believing space today? If you could just add in the chat just where you are at the moment.
Looks like you have an emotional bunch out here. We have a couple believing,
Yes,
intellectual, but a whole lot of emotional going on today.
good, good.
Interesting. In the chat, we have some people saying, I feel like we're sort of rolling through all of the emotions at the same time or feeling more than one. And yeah, it is definitely a time for that. While we're giving Kevin a moment, I'm actually going to I'm not sure if any of you have heard of Singleton's work before, where this courageous conversation is coming from. So I will put a link in there to that book. It's actually quite good if anyone wants to take a deeper dive on the critical conversations.
Thank you, Stephanie. So you said we're all in the emotional space today?
Pretty much. There are a couple that are feeling sort of all over the place. I think there was some intellectuals, some believing.
So I'm coming in the acting space. And I say that because right now, just because of the work that we're currently doing, is really preparing our classrooms and our teachers for the change of weather, the change of season. And we know that a lot of times right now that also impacts culture and climates and buildings. And so we're really supporting teachers with um, reviewing expectations and making sure that those are clear, and how we support students as they are also adjusting to changes in life and changes in seasons. And so I'm coming into this conversation in the acting space of really reinforcing the thought and the idea of making sure that our environments are accepting and where students are feeling safe and they belong. So thank you all for sharing. So as we enter this conversation, it would be impossible for me, in my experience, to have this conversation about nurturing environments without first talking about the background or the problem or the issues that we face on a daily basis with providing service to students. And so an understanding of ACEs and talking about the national trends and data on trauma exposure and the good news of the rewiring of the brain and providing protective factors. So nearly 1/2 of Americans have been exposed to at least one adverse childhood experience, according to the CDC. And so I'm sure that some of you are familiar with the adverse childhood experiences, or the ACEs, research that was conducted over 2 decades ago, 1998, when Kaiser Permanente and the CDC did a collaborative research, and I think it was in California. But that research was predominantly for participants who were mainly white. They were 75% white. They were middle class. They were from the suburbs. Middle age, they had degrees, they had jobs, they had insurance. And so out of that research, it did they were able to make the connection of childhood adversity that spanned the lifetime. The impact of those experiences had an impact into adulthood. But what also happened in 2012, as this research became widely known, there were other researchers that wanted to do a variation or another iteration of that same research. And so in 2012, Dr. Roy Wade did the same or a similar research using a survey in the greater Philadelphia area, but this time the population changed. It was predominantly people of color. And so out of that research, we began to see that there are systemic barriers, there are systemic adversities that also challenge particular populations. And those also have an impact on the adversity that certain people, particularly our Black students, our LGBTQ plus students, our students with disabilities, that there are certain things that when you live in an urban environment, that it has an impact on your mental, physical development that also unaddressed can span the lifetime. But I also want to highlight on a 2021 research that was conducted by the CDC that highlighted specifically what that impact had on teenagers. And so during right following the pandemic, COVID-19, they surveyed students aged to 18 or younger, and they found that at least 73% of those students, at least one, had an A score. 53% reported one or two, 12% three, and 7.8% reported four or more ACEs. And again, it has now been over two decades since the ACE study, and a strong body of work demonstrates that adversity is a critical factor in adolescent risk behaviors, including violence, school failure, and substance use. Even more so, the likelihood of adversity among youth in more deprived areas, such as urban and low socioeconomic regions, are more susceptible to adversity. So let's dig deeper for the understanding of the impact of adversity on the developing brain. So, as we know, our brains, we grow and develop, and current research is saying that around 26 years old, our brains become fully developed. But the challenge for our developing brains, our young people, our youth, is when they experience toxic stress or prolonged toxic stress and adversity or trauma, that this has, and it definitely has an impact on their brain. So when we look at the prefrontal cortex, which we also call the learning, the thinking brain, and then the lower brain or the limbic system, which is our emotional system. What happens when we are faced with a challenge is that our brain perceives that, and then our reaction to a threat or danger is that cortisol and adrenaline, is released. And that survival brain or the lower brain, it kicks in, and the prefrontal cortex cannot be accessed. So the reasoning is not accessed. And so we're going to do three things. We're going to fight our way out of that situation, we're going to run away from that situation, or we're going to do nothing. Eventually, when we're able to calm down and the threat or the danger has ended, and there's maybe some buffering, there's a connection, or for someone to help us to mitigate that experience, it's ended, and we just have the memory of that experience. However, when a person is always experiencing prolonged stress or toxicity, that cycle continues. So you're always perceiving a threat, or you're always thinking that a threat is near, and that cortisol and that adrenaline is always flooding the brain. And for a child, that impacts their memory. It impacts their relationships. It impacts the neurological system in the brain of the neurons connecting. And we know that that is how our memories are formed and how learning takes place. And so research has shown us, and this is all young research, and that we're still learning how the brain is formed and how it works and how it develops. And so it's really critical for us as educators, or for those of us that serve youth, that we understand that when our students are experiencing adversity, or when they're always experiencing trauma, that it's going to be very difficult for them to function in the learning environment. And that as adults, it is our responsibility to address those concerns, or at the very minimum, provide tier 1 supports, because we might not always know. We might not always know what a student is experiencing or going through. So when we look at the impact of the exposure, again, looking at learning, emotions, memory, and relationships, hyper focus on threat. I've watched students just always being very hyper vigilant, scanning the area for danger when none can be present. Incomplete assignments, poor test scores, all the distractions of what they've experienced the day before, the morning of. And we know that our students, or anyone, we don't leave our personal situations or circumstances at home. We bring those along with us. We're not separated from those. And particularly for students who are not able to compartmentalize their lives, it is very difficult for them to attend and remain focused in school. Their emotions, again, the lower brain, when that is active and it is, and the prefrontal cortex is not accessed, that can make students very upset. They're easily triggered, and they have intense feelings of fear, anxiety, and concern. The working memory, cortisol and adrenaline, it impacts the way that, again, the memory is inhibited. And so we know that memory is, it is necessary for continuous learning and to maintain focus and concentration. Relationships, students can be very guarded when they are dealing with prolonged stress and adversity, difficult with understanding social environments, and have a poor sense of self and perspective taking. So when our students are having a difficult moment, it's not that they are trying to give you a hard time. We have to understand, for some of our students, for some of our students that they're having a difficult time. They're not giving you a hard time. They're having a difficult moment in life. And that's not something that we should judge. It's not something that we understand it will persist for a long time. But what is important is that we are there to buffer and mitigate. So the good news, because we know that trauma is not the end of the story, is that neuroplasticity is the rewiring of the brain. It is the healing part of the brain. Neuroplasticity occurs when we have new experiences, or when we have an opportunity for a positive experience, to be more exact. And just because someone has experienced toxic stress or traumatic event, it doesn't mean that that is the final say. Our understanding of the brain and its ability to heal is still fairly recent. And the science behind this theory is called neuroplasticity. When cortisol and adrenaline in high prolonged doses disrupt the developing brain, the emotional acuity and social awareness of students, again, are disrupted. However, as protective factors are provided, the opposite can be true. Protective factors are people, they are environments that increase the capacity for resilience. And when neurons begin to make new connections in the brain will begin to heal from traumatic experiences. Neurons that fire together, wire together. I'm sure that you have all heard that before. And the relationship between educators and adults who serve youth can serve as protective measures to students' behavior. So let's explore further how the rewiring of the brain can take place when children are connected to safe, stable, nurturing adults and environments. So for a moment, if you have a piece of paper, if you could make 3 columns, make one for see, one for hear, and one for feel. And I'm going to give you a few seconds. If you could provide in those categories in a safe, nurturing classroom, what would you expect to see? What would you hear? And what do you think that the temperature or the feeling of that space would be? And I'll give you just a minute to jot down a few notes. And I'm going to ask a few people to share out. What would you see? What would you hear? And what would you feel? Or how would you feel in that environment? All right. So Stephanie, are participants able to come off mute and share at all?
Yes.
That is possible? Great. And so in no particular order, I think that I'll, if there are maybe 3 people that wouldn't mind share, and you can share from either category, what in the safe nurturing classroom, what you would see, what you would hear, and how would you feel? If you can get maybe 3 people who would want to share out on any of those.
I can go. My name's Jenny Lynn. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So in a safe, nurturing classroom, I would see students helping each other. I would see a very colorful classroom. I would hear a lot of laughter and a lot of kind words. And I wrote, it would just feel good and it would just feel like belonging.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I particularly like the part about students supporting students. Thank you. Anyone else?
I can go. I have that I would see authenticity, cooperation, and individuality. I would hear engagement, laughter, and I would feel a sense of calmness, safety, comfort, and understanding.
Great. Thank you. I love the individuality because when I'm safe, I can be authentic. When I'm nurtured, I can be myself. I can show up in my true identity and not feel fearful of being judged or made fun of. So thank you. And we can get one more before we continue.
Kevin, we have a comment from Bianca. I'm not 100% sure if she can unmute or not, but I wanted to lift up her voice. She can see collaboration, hear laughter, and feel warmth.
Yes, 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 yes. So when we when we're safe, we're definitely going to be vulnerable. We're going to be more relaxed, and so that's where the connection that we can just have a good time and laugh and feel accepted. Thank you all so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. So as we move further into defining, exploring safe and nurturing environments, I want to lift up addressing disparities in schools. And again, we're going to talk about some equity-based approaches and what is in our locus of control. 638, 700. Who can tell me or want to guess what that number represents? 638, 700. You can put your response in the chat. Just take a wild guess. 638, 700. And Stephanie, if you could let us know if there's any responses.
I think you've stumped us.
638, 700. No one wants to be brave and take a guess?
I think we have a, nope, everyone's like, got nothing.
No worries, no worries. So in 2022, the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights, they do a report, I believe, every 4 to 6 years on the suspension rate in the country. 638, 700 is the number of out-of-school suspensions, grades K through 12, that were used in the school year 2021. And so this is really important. I usually will try to keep and follow this research. I've been following this research since 2014. I think that was the first year that they released that report, because it really is alarming. If you really, I know that we pay attention in our local area, in our individual schools and regions about the disproportionality and the rates of suspensions, but I promise you, the trend or the pattern that happens in your local school district, it matches what's happening in our country. And so when we look at this number disaggregated, Black boys are 8% of the total enrollment in our country, but 18% of them receive suspensions. Black girls are 7% of the total enrollment, and 9% receive suspensions. The disproportionate rate of disciplinary removal for students of color is not surprising, as this gap has been the nation's trend since 1973. However, it continues to be alarming and signals the need to address the systemic barriers that are analogous across zip codes. The presence of disproportionality is an indicator that there are policies, practices, and procedures in place that produce inequitable outcomes for students. The total loss of instructional time due to classroom school disruptions that lead to office referrals and suspensions or out-of-school suspensions are immense. Exclusionary discipline deprives students of the opportunity to learn and drastically impacts their sense of belonging in school communities. It only takes one suspension to place a student in the school to prison pipeline. 638, 700,000 represents the number of times a student has been excluded, pushed out, and at times criminalized. And so again, for some of our populations, for certain demographics who we know are more susceptible to prolonged adversity and toxic stress, they show up to schools where they should feel safe and they are suspended or they're excluded. When we talk about trauma, safe and nurturing environments, what is important for us as educators is what's in our locus of control. Now that number 638, 700, I might not be able to impact that complete number, right, at a systemic level. However, I can impact that number by what happens in my individual classroom. And so really asking ourselves, what is in the locus of control that we can impact how we receive our students and the environments that we create for their safety and for their success. Trauma-informed care in the school setting can be implemented as a tier 1 approach to create a positive culture and climate. Trauma-informed care brings an awareness of the impact of toxic stress and trauma as an intervention, is integrated into school-wide policies, practices, and procedures. And so when we look at the principles of trauma-informed care, which is safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment, we think about how we are defining or developing or creating those environments where students can really build positive relationships and we foster belonging for them. Because again, we know that trauma is not the end of the story. And in order for neuroplasticity, in order for the brain to heal, in order for those neurons to begin to fire and connect, there has to be a true connection. And so we can never ignore the power of connections and relationships. And Dr. James Comer said, no significant learning occurs without significant relationship. And connection is why we're here. Connection gives us purpose and meaning to our lives. The ability to feel connected, there's science behind it because it's a basic human needs. We are hardwired to build connections and have relationships with each other. So I'm looking at the time and I want to go into the evidence-based practices that I have used to really support students, again, who have experienced a pervasive trauma and toxic stress, who oftentimes were suspended from school. And so social emotional learning, to see the definition there, I believe that most of us, this is not a new term in education. What I will say about social emotional learning is that it's important because it helps to develop skills that they need for school and life. So we're not just talking about while they're in our classrooms, while they're in school, we're looking at the whole child and how we are supporting them to be lifelong learners and productive members of society. And the research says that when we provide students with the support to be more self-aware, to have self-regulation, to have social awareness, and be able to make strong, secure decisions and build relationships, that they become productive and better adults. I'm going to move forward into the presentation at the moment because I really, again, and I might be able to come back to them, but I want to move into the area of self-reflection, of the work that I've done throughout my career. And there are some guiding questions when I created this presentation that helped me to provide context and also to really highlight some of the strategies that were used. So as a school administrator, I had an opportunity. Well, it really began when I was in the classroom. I really had an opportunity of making connections, particularly with our male students. I really did not understand when I became a teacher the impact or the need for Black males in schools. And so out of the connections that I've started to build and create with students, I developed an after-school program for students. And it wasn't just for Black male students, it was for males in general. What I did not want to do is have a program that was specifically for Black male students because I felt like the staff would not understand, or it would be perceived as a place of punishment for them. And so it was very important for me that diversity and inclusion was part of the work and that it was part of the program. Although it were the Black male students that had the highest rates of suspension. And so the problem was really to address that disproportionality. And it was for secondary school students and middle and in high school. And some of the root cause factors as to why they were experiencing that, it was because of punitive discipline practices, that we were weaponizing the discipline policy against certain bodies, against certain students, and it was constantly being perpetuated. There was implicit and explicit bias, and the students felt that. They might not have been able to explain or say it was implicit or explicit, but they were very aware of certain students that treated them differently or unfairly. The lack of role models, particularly Black males in schools, the lack of options for constructive and out of school time. So often they were out after school. They had unconstructed time where they were getting into behaviors or risky behaviors, and that would oftentimes spill in to their behavior as a scholar in school. So some of the support that was provided, I tapped into the 40 developmental assets, which at the time, I had no understanding. Back in 2008, I was not using words as social emotional learning and trauma-informed care because I had not been formally trained and was aware of those approaches or those interventions. But someone introduced me to the 40 developmental assets, and I began to use that framework as a curriculum for this program. So after school, it was generally a 3-hour program after school. And we did team building exercises, journaling and reflecting. I wanted them to be able to learn how to reflect on their day and reflect on their behavior, but also to express gratitude and to think about gratitude, the things that they had or the things that they were thankful for. We used the 40 developmental assets. There was usually a character of the week or a word of the week that we designed role-playing scenarios around. Students were able to act out certain situations and provide feedback and advice to each other. There was community engagement. I made sure and connected these young men to the community. And we had speakers that would come in and talk about different careers or talk about their life so that they could see another man who had similar experiences as they were having, to know that to give them hope and to give them a sense of direction, career exploration, of course. And then at the end of the day, we had to squeeze in some time for them to go to the gym and have physical activity. Most of the time is usually basketball or football, but we needed that downtime as they were transitioning home. As a result of the program, we did see improved attendance, relationships with trusted adults. There were other mentors that I pulled in to work with me from the community. I tapped into the local university, some of the college students who were also interested in making connections with young men and being a role model, were able to support the effort. We saw a reduction in discipline. But what was really important for me is that I began to see these young men shine and have a different sense and perspective of who they were as a person. Because some of them had experienced so many office referrals, being kicked out of the room, and exclusionary measures that would oftentimes leave them in the hallway or leave them in the office, or sometimes in school or out of school suspension. And that was the norm for some of them. But to see the impact of having those conversations about character and social emotional learning, and see the impact that it had on their countenance, to be quite direct, that it was amazing to see them grow into and to be more authentic, and to have an opportunity to connect with other male students and male adults. The other thing that I would say that was, the best experience about this is that I'm still in contact with some of these young men. After the program, I relocated to another state, so I lost contact with some of them, but thankfully, because of social media, we've been able to reconnect. And so they are now successful. Some of the ones that I'm in contact with and continue to have a relationship with, I can see the impact of the efforts that we had on them when they were in middle school and high school. And some of them have been very clear on saying that the work that we did and the relationships that we had with them were young was the thing that saved them from getting into trouble. And so we have some that own their own businesses. They're married, they have children, they've gone off to college and have successful careers. And so again, I would say the greatest highlight and the benefit of the program is seeing successful adults. My next experience that I want to highlight was in the Richmond, Virginia area. I was working for a middle school, and this was a very profound moment in my career because there was the principal understood the impact and was really diving deep in the research of trauma-informed care and social emotional learning. So our leadership were sold in to shifting the culture and providing opportunities not only for students, but for the staff to really grow and develop in these approaches. And I kid you not, it was my first time ever. We were a middle school that practiced mindfulness throughout the day. Teachers were encouraged to give students at least 5 minutes in the beginning of class or at the end of class to practice mindfulness. And one of the ways that looked, they would sometimes dim the lights in the classroom. They would play music. They would allow students to either read, journal, or color mandalas. And so it was a way of really quieting students for having a time of really selling and practicing self-regulation. Out of that experience, the principal assigned me to, wanted me to develop a behavior learning intervention classroom for our students who had emotional disability because they were being suspended, although they had a behavior intervention plan. And so my role was really to develop a program and a class that taught social emotional learning, character development, and self-regulation. So once one class, one period a day, those students who were identified as having an emotional disability, we participated in lessons that were geared toward the 5 competencies of understanding self-awareness, self-management, again, making responsible decision-making, social awareness. And we use the Y-Try curriculum, which is based on character development and social emotional learning. We were able to connect to community organizations to bring in a yoga instructor. And we connected with the Richmond Peace Center, and they came and trained us and taught us how to conduct and implement restorative practices. And the picture on the right is one of our sessions. They would bring in the djembes, and we will have a session with drumming that was especially liked by some of our male students. But then we had restorative circles, and it amazed me how forming in a circle, looking each other in the face and allowing students to share from the deepest part of them, the impact that it had on their behavior. Also with this, we folded in a lot of team building because a lot of our students did not know, they had trouble with conflict resolution and getting along with each other. And one of the ways that we did that in smaller, intimate spaces was provide scenarios and team building exercises for them. The results of that program was improved attendance. A lot of our students were coming to school late, or they were not coming to school at all. And because we began to fold in a actual class for them to just have a moment where it was not, it was outside of the other contents, that it opened them up to themselves, to be quite frank. And it allowed them to learn and to be challenged in different ways. And so relationship building, the reduced discipline, referrals was an impact of this program. And again, the classroom self-regulation so that they could re-enter the classroom if they were ever asked to leave. And so as a buffer and a way to mitigate the office referrals, if a student was having a difficult time because they were a part of this program, they would be sent to my classroom so that they would have an opportunity to calm down. They would have an opportunity to speak to a trusted adult. And when they were ready, I was able to walk them back to class so that they could re-enter the classroom to participate. So it was, again, probably one of the most profound moments in my career where I could really see the connection between what students were experiencing and how that showed up for them in class and how it showed up for them in school. And as adults, what was in our locus of control to really support them in being better students. The last experience that I want to highlight is my family, my wife and I, we decided to move back to Maryland. And this was right after the Freddie Gray riots. There was an opportunity for us to move to the Baltimore area, and I was hired by Baltimore to participate in the Promoting Student Resilience Grant. And there were 3 cities that received this grant. It was Baltimore, it was Chicago, and it was St. Louis. And all of the cities received funding due to civil unrest of some kind. For Baltimore, it was the Freddie Gray riots. And what was important about that grant was really addressing systemic barriers that some of our policies in schools that was really impeding the success of students. And it involved professional development and trauma-informed care, social emotional learning, and restorative practice. So this was my opportunity to become a trained facilitator of all of the approaches so that we could support schools and be boots on the ground with them to respond to the level of disruption as a result of the riots. Now, I must say that before the Freddie Gray riots, Baltimore was already identified as a city of high toxic stress and trauma, but that exacerbated it. And then following that was the pandemic. And so there really wasn't there were a short time of recovery between the riots and the pandemic. However, the work that we did was heavily focused on mental health and making sure that schools were a safe place, not only for our students, but a safe place for our staff, because a lot of our staff members were being traumatized by some of the impact and some of the behaviors that our students were exhibiting in school. And out of that experience, I wanted to share some of the anecdotal data from some of the restorative practices. So on your screen, you will see just a few quotes that I was able to collect, and I took copious amounts of notes as I was, as a staff specialist, supporting schools. And so the first one says, "One day my twin sister and I were at a playground near the harbor, and as my sister came down the slide, a boy turned the slide over and knocked her unconscious. She wasn't breathing, and I had to give her CPR. The EMT and police took a long time to arrive." That response that she gave was out of the question, describe a challenging moment or time that was difficult for you. And so that student was very transparent. She was very open. And so this work the data that I'm sharing with you now was out of supporting one school in particular that was an alternative school, and they had a concern with attendance and with students staying in school all day long, because quite often the students were skipping school. They would come late, and then some of them would leave early. And so this particular school, I did a lot of work with supporting the teams with trauma-informed care and restorative circles. And so just in my work with being in classrooms and modeling the practice and facilitating circles, this data came out. The other one that I want to highlight was the last to the left. Parents need to understand that what you think is wrong or the problem is not the issue. When we're ready to talk, we'll come to you. We just need to know that you'll be there when we're ready to open up and talk. So on this particular day, the teacher was having a really difficult moment, and she was transparent with her classroom that the relationship between her and her son was very awkward at the moment, that he was a teenager, and she felt like they really weren't vibing, and that she really wasn't understanding him as a teenager. And so she opened up to the classroom and said, if there is any advice that you can provide me in support of my child, I would really appreciate it. And so she reached out to them because they are the same age as her son. And this was one of the responses. So I'm only highlighting this to say is that we think that our students are not ready, that they're not ready, or that restorative circles or restorative practices is not something that they would gravitate to or be accepting of. And I'm here to tell you that the data is that is completely inaccurate, because the data that we were able to collect and the observations that we were able to do on students' response to a welcoming environment and to restorative circles was completely opposite. And I'm almost out of time. And as I'm closing, I want to share this quote from Chaim Ganat. I have come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. And as a teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, a child humanized or dehumanized. Throughout this presentation, I've brought an awareness and demonstrated through my educational experience as a teacher, administrator, mentor, and consultant of how the impact of chronic stress and prolonged adversity can be subsided by safe, stable, and nurturing relationships. I would like to return to my grounding statement, for these are all our children. We will profit by and pay for what they become. Again, this speaks to the deep collective responsibility that we hold in shaping the lives of young people. It underscores the idea that well-being, success, and future of all children, not just our own, are a shared investment. If you could, at this moment, I'm going to ask if you could share one thing that either filled your bucket during this presentation, something that was maybe a warm, a fuzzy, or it inspired you. Or you could share something that challenged your belief. And lastly, a strategy or idea that you would like to implement. If you could just add your comments in the chat, and then we can open up for any questions that any of the participants might have today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for registering to attend this session. I greatly appreciate your listening ear, and hopefully I've said something this morning that, again, would inspire you in the work that you are already doing and the great work that you are already doing to serve our students, and that you would have gained knowledge or ideas in supporting those efforts. So thank you all so much for attending. and I'll give you a few moments to provide a response in the chat.
Thank you, Kevin. A lot of people really, that quote by Baldwin is really one that's resonating with a lot of people.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. At this time, if there we have a few, well, like a minute. If there are any questions or any comments, I am open and available to receive those.
Jenny Lynn, you had a question about the next training like this. Were you referring to Kevin specifically?
Oh, yes, like more information like this in terms of like you facilitating a training, just talking about more strategies and helping out students, and talking about similar to what you did today, evidence-based practice, things like that.
Okay. I will be open to that opportunity.
The center's next webinar, if you're interested in the series, is on April 3rd at 10 a.m. And that's with Erin Bruno.
Thank you again, Kevin. Really, really great information.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Lots of gratitude in the chat, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Karen has put in the chat the link to our future webinar, and also there's a link to our summit. It's on April 29 and 30 at Harrisburg University in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And that first day is specific institutes on student wellness, and then a full day of training and workshops on April 30th. Thank you again for joining us today, and another thank you to Kevin. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Have a great day, everyone.
You too.